Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jarrell Mason, aka J Mace, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Album Cover, where we get inside the entertainment industry with those in the know and give them their flowers right here to be celebrated. With me right now, I have my bro from the contending, David E. Phillips. David, what's going on? And appreciate you coming back once again.
Hey, Jarrell. Hey, anytime. You and I can go on forever, and we have to make sure we cut ourselves off so people will be entertained and not
Yeah,
exhausted.
yeah, so we're just two pop culture music nerds nerding out, and what we're going to nerd out over today is the 2025 inductees to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In the performance category, we have Bad Company, Joe Cocker, Cyndi Lauper, Soundgarden, Outkast, Chubby Checker, White Stripes. Musical excellence category, Warren Zevon, and Salt and Pepper. I believe that's musical influence. Musical excellence, Thom Bell, Nancy K of the Wrecking Crew, not Nancy K, Carol K, Wrecking Crew, and who's the third person I'm leaving out,
Nicky
David?
Hopkins. Nicky Hopkins.
Nikki Hopkins,
Played a
and
lot of
then
piano for the Stones. Yeah. Yep.
the Ahmet Edigrim Award winner goes to Lenny Waronker. So, no particular order, your thoughts on the 2025 inductee class?
Yeah, if we were to start with the performers, I would say, I remember reading a lot of rock journalists who were voters saying this is the most stale class that they've ever had to vote on. And I think part of that is that you are eligible for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 25 years after your first recording. None of these artists who made the list this year were at the had went from 25 years to being on the ballot. All of them waited and then got on the ballot. I mean, Outkast, who I think was the most obvious slam dunk in this category, has been eligible for 6 years, uh,
Mm.
and without be coming up for consideration. Another thing that's going on is I wonder if the voting block is of such an age that now they're like scraping the bottom of the 70s AOR. I mean, I'm worried REO Speedwagon and Styx are going to get in, and then I'm going to have to set myself on fire. But Bad Company is not an inexcusable choice. Joe Cocker, I think, is a perfectly acceptable choice. Chubby Checker, I'm mixed on because I think a lot of his music was novelty music, and I think he's got six versions of the twist, but nonetheless, he did have 23 pop hits. He's got a great voice, and it's nice for an 83-year-old man to cap his career, with something with a nice recognition like this. Soundgarden should have been an easy in a long time ago. They were part of the four-headed monster of grunge, and I hope Alice in Chains gets a look at somewhere down the line. And the White Stripes, while I would vote for their induction, he's a Jack White's a very unique guitar player, and they definitely made they were very influential to a lot of people. What catches me most is in the performer category is the lack of interest in the voting block in people who became successful in the 80s. All we have is Cyndi Lauper here. And Gen X seems to be, whether it's new wave, whether it's alternative rock, whether it's some of the early hip hop that I think like that in the 80s that that I mean I don't know, I would vote for Big Daddy Kane, to be perfectly honest. I think there's I think it's going to be interesting to see because what's going to happen. There really is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame shouldn't be called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame anymore because rock and roll as a radio entity powerhouse, at least for now, is done. It doesn't exist on the airwaves hardly at all. And so what you see is when you look at, artists like Outkast and Cyndi Lauper, making the list, and I know Mariah Carey fell short, and Salt and Pepper getting in on the musical influence is, at what point does the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame have to just kind of admit there aren't that many rock and rollers left to induct? There are some, but you have to go back to the 80s and stop ignoring the Generation X group. And I will say that the biggest omission this year is Joy Division slash New Order, which those two bands could have gone in separately. And the reason why they were kind of collapsed together is because Joy Division was a band with all the members of New Order in it, and then the lead singer Ian Curtis committed suicide, and then New Order, their guitar player, just stepped into the lead vocals. They changed their name, but it's essentially the same band, and then their sound changed as time went on. But if you want to talk about 80s alternative rock and who was incredibly influential, I saw Radiohead on YouTube playing a New Order song the other day. Um, if Depeche Mode gets in, and fine. I mean, Depeche Mode barely played any instruments. It was mostly just, keyboard stuff. Then fine, but New Order is much more deserving. So
Mm.
I think what's going to have to happen if they're going to try to continue to find guitar, drums, and bass artists, they're going to run out of the 70s and they're going to have to move into the 80s at some point and give some of these people a chance. And I also think like people like Anita Baker, should be considered here too. When we look at soul artists that I think come from the jazz and blues and soulfulness of like an Aretha Franklin. So I think that the Hall of Fame is very much at a crossroads where its name is getting to the point where it doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, I agree. Since you're putting all genres in, it should be the Music Hall of Fame, Pop Music Hall of Fame, something to
Yeah,
reflect
Popular
that
Music Hall of
you're
Fame.
you're
Yeah.
showing more than just rock. And I'm curious, do you know if Devo is in?
They are not, and that is a terrible omission. That is on my list of awful omissions. In Excess isn't in. The only Australian rock band that is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is AC/DC. And there's a long history of great Australian rock. And In Excess would be, I would say, the second most popular band from there. At one point, In Excess was the biggest band in the world. But one thing that's interesting to me, and I think this impacted both Oasis and Manya's candidacies. Uh, Manya is humongous in any Spanish-speaking country. Absolutely
Mm,
massive. Oasis had some hits over here, definitely had some success over here, sold more than a few records, but they weren't humongous. But everywhere else in the world, for about a decade, they were the biggest band on earth.
mm,
And Oasis is getting back together to go out on tour, and you can't get a ticket. And what I would say to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is Oasis might be the biggest rock band in the world right now without a record. And so I look at that and I think to myself, is it the American Rock and Roll Hall of Fame where for acts from other countries to get in, they have to have had 10 to 15 top 10 hits or top 40 hits to be considered?
mm.
Uh, or if you're like Salt and Pepper, who I think had 8 top 40 hits, and they were all, of course, stunted by the fact that hip hop had a hard time getting on the radio once when they first started. Are you in that point of view where, well, yeah, they don't have as many hits, in the top 40, but they were strong influencers and they were American,
Mm.
right? So I think there's like some prejudice here against artists that maybe were more successful overseas, had some influence over here, and deserve more attention and deserve not just nominations but induction.
Right, and you mentioned that you feel Anita Baker should be in. I do as well. Do you think Sade should be in?
Oh God, yes. When was she up last year, year before? Yeah, I made it my personal mission to vote for her every night. If George Michael, I always say I would love, love, love to hear George Michael sing Smooth Operator and to hear Sade sing Careless Whisper. That would like nothing would in life would make me happier than to hear them do those tunes. George obviously is never going to do Smooth Operator unless there's some tape out there that we don't know about. But you know, if Sade ever decided to tour again, it would be lovely if she did a version of Careless Whisper, because Careless Whisper is just the best Sade song that she never recorded. And George is in the Hall of Fame, right?
Hmm.
And you know, Sade's mixture of pop and jazz and R&B, you know, is it rock? No, but not. But there's a lot of artists in the Hall of Fame who aren't rock. Kraftwerk isn't rock, you know, if we want to go like even to a further extent. So yeah, Sade in a heartbeat. I mean, the record sales are there, the hits are there, and the fact that there was no one else like her when she was doing it. I mean,
Right.
she was a army of one. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And when you think about when Sade came out at the time with Diamond Life, I believe it was like 85, and she had success in Europe prior to coming over to the
Yep.
US. You know, I interviewed TC Tompkins, who was a promo man at Epic when he was breaking Sade here in the States, and they had to play the game of we got to market you to R&B because that's all America's going to see you first, and then we're going
Yep.
to widen your branch out to top 40 to AC, and that's where the mainstream success came along. And you mentioned Anita Baker earlier about that time period with Anita, Sade, Luther Vandross, who I feel should
Oh,
be in
there's
the Rock and
another
Roll
one.
Hall of Fame, another one. And
Yeah,
just
yeah.
how that time period of R&B, it was lush, it was smooth. And then we get around 87, 88, we have Keith Sweat, we have Guy, we have the emergence of all of the rap acts. You mentioned Salt and Pepper starting to get play
New
on
Jack Swing.
radio, the
Yeah.
whole New Jack Swing sound, and how it was a contrast to where I'm sure radio programmers were like, how do we program this young aggressive sound with this mellow, smooth R&B
Yeah.
sound that is more in line with our listeners and our buyers who we're trying to get advertising from.
If Luther would have been you know, popular in the 60s instead of the 80s or 90s, I think he'd already be in. You know, I think there's a so, like I said, I think there's some prejudice between the pop folks became popular. He was considered that quiet storm thing, which is
Yep.
almost like being called New Age, you know, where like, you know, like as if Luther Vandross were Yanni or something, right? Or John Tesh or something. But yeah, Luther, the thing that man, a lot of people don't know about Luther is Luther recorded Young Americans with David Bowie. He was one of the prime backup singers. He co-wrote one of the songs and he arranged a lot of the backing vocals. Luther could do anything. And the idea that, you know, with all the success he's had the hits, he's sold more than enough records, that he hasn't even been considered, it's hard to make sense of it.
Yeah, because I didn't know this until watching the Never Too Much documentary that he fronted
Mhm.
a band with his name prior to him cutting solo records. I did
Yeah.
not know that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, and he went through the hard way of music too. He used to sing jingles and you know and all of that. So I mean, there is not a silkier voice in the history of popular music than Luther. And you know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he closed out his career with "Dance with My Father," which is just about one of the most heartbreaking songs you know you could ever hear. Yeah, I'm lost on that one.
Yeah.
You know, not to even be nominated by this point is just I'm clueless on it.
Yeah, and Dance with My Father, I believe, was written by Richard Marx.
Mm-hmm. Which is funny because I always hated Richard Marx, and then and he's also very funny on social media, by the way. Richard Marx. But yeah, I never liked Richard Marx. I thought his music was so formula. But yeah, he wrote a beautiful song, and Luther killed it.
Yep, and he married Daisy Fuentes, so Richard Marx is winning.
Yeah, no, he is not losing. No, you know, there's I remember on Twitter, somebody in his age group said, "Who the hell is Richard Marx?" to him, right? And he said, I'm the guy your ex-girlfriend used to have sex with to my songs in the back seat of the car."
Burn.
Yeah, Richard's not a guy to mess with. If
No, he should have said your girlfriend was telling me to hold on to the nights while she was right here waiting for me.
And the memories, right?
Yeah, yeah. Who knew Richard Morris had burned? But like you mentioned, Luther Vandross came in the hard way, cutting jingles, and he was actually on an episode of Sesame Street back in the day,
Ooh.
singing backgrounds. And then also too, I didn't realize this that it was the late great Roberta Flack who encouraged Luther to pursue his solo career because he was singing backgrounds for her. And she was like, nah, you too good to just be singing
Yeah.
backgrounds, and would kind of give him time in her shows to kind of sort of work his skill. And that was the rocket that kind of shot off Luther to where we know and love him as the solo artist who we know and love. And I didn't realize this till a couple of years ago that all the records that he did were covers. House is Not a Home, the Unworked original, he covered it. Creeping, originally done by Stevie Wonder. He covered that. Pretty much all the records he did were covers, but that just goes to show you how great of a vocalist Luther
He
was
made
to
him his
where he
own. Yeah.
took those original recordings and made it his own.
Yep, absolutely. And you mentioned Roberta Flack. That's another person who should be in the Hall of Fame. And to you go on a tangent with her, Donny Hathaway as well.
Oh
Uh,
yes.
those two are long, far too long overlooked. And I think there's been some advancement with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I think it's still too white, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-mm.
I think they've been very good to the Chuck Berrys and the Little Richards and the Big Joe Turner and Solomon Burke and those folks from the BB King, those folks from the early years and the blues eras. But they have not been so kind to, I mean, I don't understand why the Time isn't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, I know they only made 3 albums, but that's two more than the Sex Pistols, and the Sex Pistols are in.
Mm.
Uh, People worship. Actually, they made 4 albums once they got away from Prince. But that's an iconic band, with killer tunes and great funky stuff, and we're a great live band.
Mm.
So there's and you look at like Jimmy Jam and the talent that was in that band. There's this idea that they were just Prince's puppets, but Morris Day scored hits on his own. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis became the most prolific producers for what, about 20 years. Jelly Bean, has done production and played drums for other people. Jesse had a successful solo career for about 3 albums, and he also, people give Prince credit for this, but Jesse was the person who came with the guitar solo on Jungle Love. That wasn't Prince saying, "Here, here, play this." No,
Mm.
Jesse. So I actually think Jesse was probably the most talented member of the time.
Mm. And then Jesse also gave Sly Stone a boost when they cut Crazy.
Yes, yes, yes. And I was always hurt that Sly didn't double down on that, But Sly's been in a weird place for a long time. But it's amazing. The only person who could bring him out of hiding after all those years was Jesse Johnson. So that was a real gift from Jesse.
Yeah, definitely that. And I think Jimmy and Terry, they'll eventually get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for their production work
They
and
are.
their
They are.
songwriting. They're
Actually,
already in.
yep,
They're already in.
yep, yep. They got in
Yep.
as, in one of the side categories or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that same treatment on the side categories, I think that'll probably come with LA and Babyface as well. Because they,
Yeah.
they should be in as well. Babyface, one of the most prolific producers, songwriters of our time.
Well, there's a lot of producers that I think are missing. Roy Thomas Baker died recently, and he produced the most iconic Queen albums and the early Cars albums. I mean, right there, that list to me says "Do not stop, go straight to the hall."
Mhm.
As far as I'm concerned. So
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of folks missing from that, and which kind of brings us to Tom Bell, because Tom is somebody who should have been in a long time ago for that Philly sound. Uh,
Mhm.
I grew up listening to the Spinners left and right. And, Could It Be I'm Falling in Love was just the greatest song to me when I was a kid. I remember we'd go to we go to the laundromat, and I would always you smell detergent all around you, and they'd have the AM station playing there with this kind of softer music, and all I wanted was Earth, Wind and Fire's September, and I wanted the Spinners, Could It Be I'm Falling in Love? And most of the time I got it, we were there long enough.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, Tom Bell was a genius.
Yeah, and speaking of the Spinners, it was great that Henry Farnsborough, who was the last original member of the Spinners before he passed away, got to see the Spinners get inducted and to
Yep.
see another act who I feel will eventually get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is just the amount of when New Edition performed
Yep.
the Spinners records and to see how they were paying tribute to the group that influenced their style and how the spinners often get overlooked in the groups when we think about the 70s, but glad to see them finally get in last year. And when you're speaking about producers who should be in, I think Teddy Riley should be in.
Oh, he created a whole form of art. I mean, it seems silly to think that. I mean, there are things he didn't produce that he might as well have because it sounds exactly like what he would have done, you know.
Mm,
Uh, and to speak to your point about the Spinners and New Edition, Kool and the Gang getting in last year, I thought was a big step
mhm,
for recognizing these bands that mix funk and pop. And I'll tell you somebody else who I think in that genre who should get in, and they can put him in the musical excellence category. I don't care. Is Ray Parker Jr. Ray is hurt because his biggest hit is Ghostbusters, a novelty tune, right? But if you take away Ghostbusters and you look at his work with radio, his solo work, and particularly his session work as a guitarist.
mhm.
He was a phenomenal talent in all sorts of places, and he was getting on the radio and getting in the top 10, no pun intended saying radio, but in the top 10 when it was not easy. Like Super Freak didn't make it into the top 10. A Woman Needs Love does. The
Right.
other woman did. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Right, and with Ray Parker, when I was reading Clive Davis's book, he was talking about how the strategy of being able to market him to multiple formats, where his sound appealed to pop and AC, but of
Mhm.
course with the core being R&B, that was the same strategy he used when he signed Whitney.
Mhm.
And he came up under Stevie Wonder. I believe he came in through Wonderland. Him, I believe Greg Gaines came up under there.
Yeah.
Denise Williams was singing backgrounds, and I think Greg Gaines, don't quote me. Greg Gaines, I believe, also came in under Wonderland as well. And like you mentioned, the radio stuff, Jack and Jill,
Mhm.
two places at the same time, his solo work. Um, I just can't get over loving you, and a woman needs love of a woman. But
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
Ghostbusters was his one where it's that winning lottery ticket where no matter your other stuff, you're always going to be associated with that song.
You know, it's funny. I went to Notre Dame to hear Sigourney Weaver speak, and Sigourney Weaver has made a ton of really good movies. And what music did they have her walk out to?
Alien,
No,
oh
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters.
Freaking Ghostbusters. I was like, are you serious? Could have been like the Year of Living Dangerously or Alien or just something cooler. I mean, and the thing about Ghostbusters is that it doesn't make Ray any money because of the suit with Huey Lewis because the melody is so similar to Huey's
I want a new drug.
I want a yeah, yeah. So it doesn't benefit Ray in terms of credibility or finances anymore.
Mhm. Right,
You know?
right, right. Do you think that's another act that should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Huey Lewis in the News.
No, no, I don't. I think Huey Lewis was a nice little bar band that made good. And, I was talking to Max Weinberg from the E Street Band the other day for the documentary Road Diary that is hoping to get an Emmy nomination this year. And he refers to the E Street Band as the greatest bar band in existence. And, you know, it's a little that's sweet of him to call themselves that,
Hmm.
but they're like pretty amazing musicians.
Right.
Huey Lewis in the News, I think they were sweet musicians, but I don't see where anybody is ever going to say in future rock history, one of my influences was Huey Lewis in the News.
Right.
East Coast.
Is Faces and or Rod Stewart in?
Yes, Rod Stewart's in, and Faces and Small Faces are both in. So the same way with Joy Division and New Order, where they kind of like put them, collapse them together as one
Mm,
entity. Small Faces and Faces got collapsed together, and they did make it
mm.
in.
Phil Collins.
No, and that's, I would have at one time I would have been, because he's in with Genesis. I will say that.
Okay.
Although I think the Peter Gabriel years when he was a drummer probably helped him get in. But if we're looking at, you know, Whitney Houston and other and George Michael and pop musicians like that, and I was heavily in favor of George Michael, especially since he wrote and produced all of his own material. But Phil Collins is an outstanding musician. He's a great drummer. He's a good piano player. He can play guitar. He can produce. He and he had there was a period about 10 years where I feel like he could have put out Mary Had a Little Lamb and it would have been a hit. He just was unstoppable. So if what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame done has done, which is to, in my mind, lower the bar down to like the Journey and Kiss level, Phil Collins clears that level. That's to
Hmm.
me. Phil Collins clears that level and by some distance.
Right. So he's not in for his solo work, correct?
Not for his solo work, yeah. A couple other interesting people who are not in for their solo work but are in with their bands. Robert Plant for Led Zeppelin is not in, and his records post Led Zeppelin are far more interesting than the rest of the band. Well, one of them died, but the other two members of the band have done. And Sting is not in. He's in with the Police, but he's not in for his solo work. And and as years go by, it becomes more and more confusing as what the qualifications are.
Right.
Um, you know, when the hits are there, the sales are there, the quality of review is there.
Right.
Kiss got shitty reviews and they still got in.
Right. And it feels like, right now with Mariah Carey not being in, that's a slam dunk that should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'll tell you what though, we'll have to differ a little bit here. If she got in, I would not make it. I would not put up an argument because there is something about being at the pinnacle of your profession for 15 consecutive years. Because I did the math on this. It's about 15 years where she was arguably the most popular artist in the world. Not female, not male, not band, just pure artists in the world. I've always thought her songwriting was like Diane Warren's songwriting, which is it's just very generic most of the time. I only think she has two great songs. That is Vision of Love and We Belong Together. That being said, here's what I try to do when I look at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I My personal opinion does not is not a factor, but I look at the resume and I say, has this person done enough in the terms of hits, sales, influence, longevity?
Mhm.
Those are the four areas I look at. And it's hard to deny her, even if I would not pick her. So it's a strange little space that I'm in. I would probably vote for somebody else among my seven choices to vote. But if she got in, I would understand it. You know, I
Mhm.
wouldn't. I wouldn't put up a fight.
Yeah,
Kiss, I will put up a.
mhm. And with Kiss, you mentioned that their albums didn't really get good reviews with the critics, but once audience got a hold of them and they saw the makeup,
Yeah,
the spectacle of Kiss, that's when everything started to catch fire for them. And I think one record label that doesn't get talked about enough, but played an
Casablanca.
integral role in their rise, along with the rise of disco and everything that we kind
Yep.
of see now. Casablanca, which I went to
Yep.
go see that Spin and Gold movie. I liked it, but it really bombed. I was the only person in theater that went to go see the movie. But
Oh, man.
because I'm a music nerd, I just went to go
Yeah.
see it anyway. But
You
just
know,
talk
look,
about
being in a movie by yourself
Casablanca.
is not bad. Seeing a movie by yourself and then with nobody else in the theater to bother you is not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, 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 no. I'll take that every day of the week. So
Yeah.
just talk about, Casablanca Records and their impact on disco and especially Kiss.
Well, it's interesting because, Funky Town, I think, is probably the most deathless song that came out of Casablanca from the disco era. And Kiss was sort of like their oddity, on the label. And I think look, Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine loves Kiss. I'm not going to argue with Tom Morello, but Kiss to me was a carnival act, and I, I've just never been able to make sense of that sort of. I don't know. It's like so how I could say about Bon Jovi. He's hair metal Springsteen. And he's a really nice guy, by the way. John Bon Jovi is a really nice guy.
Mhm.
But Casablanca, they didn't the label didn't last a long time. But the hits they pumped out over a short period of time and the influence, yeah, it's kind of been lost to history for sure.
Right, right. There's one person that oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Mellencamp is Mellencamp in.
Yes, Mellencamp is in. Yep. He had to wait a while. I think there was that. So it's funny because Tom Petty's from Florida and Springsteen's from the East Coast, but I think the working man's bands were Tom Petty, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Seger, and John Mellencamp in that era.
Mhm,
And John was the last to get in, but he did get in it. And I think he deserved it. And there aren't that many Indiana liberals, so
mhm.
I clap for him.
Right, and with Cyndi Lauper going in, I just saw her documentary that came out, I believe, last year. Cyndi Lauper, one of the vocalists I think nobody really looks at as saying, "Oh, she's," because we look at the look,
Yeah,
the image of Cyndi Lauper, but her pipes
yeah, 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 yeah.
were unbelievable. What she's so unusual, great album, and
Yep.
for a minute there, she was up there with Madonna. We were kind of having that
Yeah.
Cyndi Lauper versus Madonna conversation for a minute.
Yep, yep, we were. And like I think she was such a polar opposite to Madonna, but she had the songs. And one of the things that she's so unusual that people often aren't aware of because the band that backed her and co-wrote a lot of those songs with her, they weren't popular for very long, but they did have a few hits of their own. But the Hooters from Philadelphia were the backing band for her on a lot of those tracks co-wrote Time After Time and some other of the hits on the album. So she had a real band behind her. If you want to see something fabulous, go look up on YouTube Money Changes Everything.
Mhm,
It's a live performance and it is I watch it every now and then and I get chills every single time. I watch it sometimes just to cheer me up. Uh the problem Cindy had, I think, is a couple. I think she had too long of a layoff between She's So Unusual and True Colors. And True Colors did well, but it was not She's So Unusual. And she did a cover of What's Going on She's So Unusual. She did a cover of Iko Iko, the old New Orleans mainstay. It just seemed like she didn't have the songs, all for that album that were so quirky and to her appeal. It made her seem a little more middle of the road.
mhm.
The other part is that getting involved with professional wrestling, I do not think helped her. I do not think helped her. I think it was cute at the time. I think it played well at the time, but I think it made people feel like she wasn't serious. And that's completely unfair
Right.
because it's not true at all.
Yeah. So you thought the rock and wrestling connection made her look more like a novelty act?
I think it worked in the beginning, but I think the sell by date was a lot earlier than
Mhm,
maybe she would have known. I always say this about Madonna. no one has, and I like Madonna by the way, and I think she deserves to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and she has recorded songs that will outlive all of us, right? But I think Madonna, I don't know that there's ever been an artist who ever worked harder and ever got more out of less than Madonna. Madonna is not a vocalist with a high range. She is blessed with that little chirp in her voice that makes her distinctive. So I will give her that. She
Mhm.
can't really play an instrument. She has to work with songwriters. I don't know how much of her own lyrics she actually writes, but every Madonna song sounds like it came from her. That's a
Right.
gift. When I heard Cyndi Lauper's album True Colors, I thought True Colors sounded like to me a song that was written for her. Turns out it was.
Hmm.
Didn't sound like Cyndi Lauper to me. I mean, it was a
Right.
good tune.
Right.
It's, you know,
Right. So is Madonna in or is she not
she's
in?
in. Yeah,
Okay,
she's in.
yeah. I was like, yeah, Madonna is for sure in. But to me, one of the great musical what ifs was what if Freddie Mercury would have recorded the Faith album? How would he would have sounded?
He would have recorded the what album?
If Freddie Mercury would have recorded Faith,
Oh, the George Michael album,
George
Faith?
Michael album, yes.
That would have been fantastic. And it also, when you think of the nice connection there is when you think of George singing Somebody to Love for the Freddie Mercury concert, which, was probably the best performance of the day. Maybe it would have been fun if they would have traded albums, later in career, had George do a day at the races or something. I don't
Oh
know.
yeah, yeah. Have Freddie Mercury do one more try
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that voice of his. I mean,
Yeah.
both of them have the same range. I mean,
Yeah.
I can easily hear Freddie Mercury doing "Careless Whisper."
Oh yeah.
Easy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but but yeah, I was gonna say, but just to look at that clip of George Michael doing "Somebody to Love" and
Mhm.
with Bowie, rest in peace, and Seal
Yeah.
looking at him, and it was just a rehearsal, and he was
Right.
going
Yeah.
full throttle. I'm
Yeah.
like, this is just a rehearsal.
And
This
what you
ain't
have
even the
to
show yet.
and what you have to understand, Seal was probably just happy to be there because he was new on the scene at
Mm-hmm.
the time.
Mm-hmm.
But David Bowie coming out to watch you rehearse, that's serious business.
Mm-hmm.
you know. And then looking at him, and he was looking over at George, and he just gave us a little nods, like, "Oh, this is pretty good."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and David Bowie wasn't easy to impress. Coldplay once asked him to sing on a song, and David turned him down, and he was very polite about it because that was his nature. But he
Mm-hmm.
said, "Well," he told Chris Martin from Coldplay, he goes, "The song just isn't very good, is it?" And they asked Chris Martin about it. He goes, "Yeah, he was right.
I
It
mean,
wasn't."
it brought your ego down a couple of notches, just almost like all the people who probably maybe wanted to work for Prince, and Prince just
Yeah,
shot him down. Was like, nope, because
not good enough.
Prince was one on one. Because now when I think about it, he never collaborated with anybody unless it was something
No.
that he really controlled, whether it was
Yes,
through
he chose.
MPG
Right.
or someone that was affiliated with his camp, but he never really did any outside stuff.
Well, it's always interesting because, he came very close to, well, pretty close to doing a duet with Michael Jackson on the song Bad.
Mm-hmm.
And they were going to trade verses. And I remember Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, who had worked with both, said, I don't know how the hell that would work because Prince worked fast. He'd finish a song in 3 days. And Michael Jackson, who couldn't play an instrument, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
would, just constantly be like, the beat's just a little bit off. And you would go weeks just working on this tiny little beat, because he was in such search of perfection, where Prince felt like imperfection was part of perfection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was that part, but the biggest reason why it didn't happen is the opening line is your butt is mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Prince said, I ain't singing that to him, and he sure as hell ain't singing that to me.
Mm-hmm.
That was the end of it. That was
Right,
the end.
right. But I kind of think a Prince Michael collaboration would have been great for the fans. But
Yep.
like you stated, their work styles, and I think musically their styles wouldn't have meshed because Michael was all about the fans giving the people what they want. Prince was an artist, and I don't
Yeah.
know if either one of them would have been able to say, okay, you drive the car, I'll follow your lead because both have their lines dug in the sand. I'm not budging for nobody.
Yeah, and you know, and you also wonder where was Quincy Jones going to be in all that because Prince wasn't going to be produced. That wasn't going
Hmm.
to happen. So I mean, I don't think Quincy would have had a room. I mean, they might have locked him out of the room to get that done. And I think you're right. The argument of who was the greater artist between Michael Jackson and Prince, I don't think is really much of an argument. I think it's Prince. Prince could play 27 instruments. He produced all of his own music. He wrote all his all own songs. If you want to argue about entertainer, I'll give you Michael Jackson. If you think I don't agree with it. I've seen Prince from 15 feet away, and
Mm.
it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. But I think Michael, especially after Thriller, there was a looseness that was lost not only in his recordings but in his performances. He became more robotic. If you look at the albums that came out after Thriller, they had formulas on them. There was the Save the Children song, there was the Heal the Earth song, there was the Girl Done Me Wrong song. There was the sappy ballad for love, all of those kinds of things. He was chasing Thriller for the rest of his life. And,
Right.
and Prince never chased Purple Rain. He never
Right.
chased it.
No, which was smart because he knew that that was the album that put him over the top. And they did the US tour. And after the US tour, he went to create Around the World in a Day because there was supposed to be a European leg or the Purple Rain tour, but
Yeah.
that got scrapped because he was all about, okay, what's next? What's the now? I'm not gonna rely on what gave me success and be something new, you know?
And what's funny about that album is that is one of his albums that I listened to far more than I would have expected to because it's the last thing from Purple Rain Part Two that it possibly could have been.
Hmm.
The use of psychedelia, the sitars and the unusual effects that he put into it. The fact that the songs didn't necessarily have the most coherent flow that like the Purple Rain album, the sequencing was so perfect, you
Hmm.
know. And the variety of the music, I mean, Condition of the Heart, it starts off like a Keith Jarrett piano piece, and then Temptation is, you know, out of hand. I don't even know what to even, call that. That whole battle between, sin and savior that he goes through on that song. And I mean, Tambourine, that's a weird song. And
Right.
one of Chris Rock's comedy specials was named Tambourine. And when he closes out the show, that's the song you hear. It's
Right.
interesting how that album has kind of been reevaluated over time, because at the time people looked at it like his failed Sergeant Pepper.
Yeah, yeah, because I was about to say that album and the whole look of the Raspberry Beret video definitely gave Sergeant Pepper's vibes. And for me, the latter is my favorite record off of that album.
Oh, so good. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how Prince could turn a secular person like me into a believer for about 4 minutes.
Hmm.
So
And it's funny you
good.
mentioned
Process like
Thriller.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And funny thing how you mentioned Thriller earlier. For me personally, Thriller is not my favorite Michael Jackson album. My favorite Michael Jackson
It's off
album
the
was
wall.
Off the Wall. Off the Wall
Easy.
1, Dangerous 2, Thriller 3, Invincible 4, Bad 5.
Yeah, I think the Thriller doesn't age particularly well. I don't think. I think Billie Jean is still a cool sounding song. I love Human Nature. I know a lot of people who hate it, but it is one of the lightest, airiest songs I've ever heard,
Mm.
where you feel like you're on a cloud when you're listening to it. I just love that. But Beat It feels very dated. I just don't know how many people, and Thriller is totally a novelty song. The closest Prince ever came to a novelty song was something like Starfish and Coffee, which is basically a kid's song.
Bat
Uh,
Dance.
it's true. Yeah, you're right. Bat Dance. But that was interesting about that is that when he was working with Tim Burton for that movie, Tim Burton was under an amazing amount of stress because it was the biggest budget he'd ever dealt with. Everybody wanted to turn Batman into a franchise. There was a lot of questions around whether Michael Keaton was the right casting. He just was under a torrent of pressure. And it was one of the only times I'd ever heard Prince say something like this, but he said, I just went up to Tim and said, Mr. Burton, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? And so I think, when he created Bat Dance, which is one of the weirdest songs to ever go to number one. I mean, it really is.
Mhm.
But some of what's in Bat Dance is fabulous. The guitar work is just, out of hand.
Right, and it was discovered not too long after Prince passed that there was a remix to Bat Dance that featured Big Daddy Kane on it, which I
Yeah.
found pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, the Kane could always bring it. He knew how to work and get the job done. But yeah, I always felt like, Prince, his greatest struggle as he got older, he had two things that I think challenged him. One was the whole record label battle. He took a lot of shots. People looked down on him for the slave thing. He became the butt of jokes. The artist formerly known as Prince. While he was still producing music that should have been on the radio, what the hits weren't as big, even though they were still terrific. He didn't even have that one. He put out Emancipation. That's a triple album loaded with radio ready material, and none of it really broke through, even though the album sold pretty well. But I think that was one struggle that he had, and I don't think Prince ever wrapped his head entirely around hip hop. I
Mhm.
just don't think he ever did. And it would have been cool if he would have lived long enough to maybe work with Outkast, because I think that would have worked.
And I also think too it would have been dope if we got to work with Kendrick Lamar as well.
Oh yeah, that's another great one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's he didn't have the highest respect for hip hop. Now, you will see speeches he gave later in life where he spoke of hip hop more positively, but I don't know that he ever really figured out how to effectively incorporate it into his own music.
Right. The closest we kind of got to that was, of course, his stuff getting sampled. MC Hammer sampling When Doves Cry for Prey, Big Daddy Kane sampling Pop Life for This Is for the Lover in You, and Arrested Development sampling Alphabet Street for Tennessee. But you kind of heard it a little bit with MPG, with Get Off, but he never really fully got immersed into hip hop.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Tony, I forget his last name, but Tony, who was the rapper on NPG, he was fine, but he wasn't special. I don't think Prince had a great ear for hip hop vocalists. What you're pointing out there is that hip hop vocalists knew a lot better what to do with Prince's music than Prince knew what to do with hip hop. My favorite rap on, since you mentioned the song, on any of Prince's music is Cat's rap on the extended version of Alphabet Street. That I love, even if it's not like the most skilled. There's a propulsion to it that I really enjoy. Talk
Mm,
to me, lover. Come and tell me what you taste. I shouldn't
mm.
rap on camera. That'll
Yeah,
rapper. Jesus.
yeah, yeah. But one of my favorite rap alt collabs was when Sinead O'Connor hooked up with MC Light for the Lay Your
Oh, that's
Hands on Me record. I think that was off the
yep.
Cobra and the Tiger record, and it was featured on the Nightmare
Lion the Cobra. The Lion
Lion
the
the Co
Cobra.
Lion the Cobra,
Yeah.
and it was featured on Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, I believe.
Mhm.
The drink. No. It was the one where the girl was in the Roach Motel. I think that was Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Dream Master. And
Mhm.
that was kind of really one of the first times where you see alt and rap mix, and
Yep.
how it was a great meshing, of the two. And we mentioned in the last interview how Sinead O'Connor was always down for the cause. When hip hop was boycotting the Grammys for not airing the rap category on the live show that she performed, that had the Public Enemy logo in her head. So she was definitely about that life.
Yep, she also defended NWA to the hilt, when they were taking a lot of heat. I was disappointed disappointed she didn't get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last year. I know she only made two albums that people refer to, but they were astounding records. And she made other good music after that that just didn't get a lot of airplay because she was basically canceled. And there's nothing more rock and roll to me about giving up your career for what you believe in, and years later, people figuring out you were right. Because to me, what she's like Muhammad Ali.
Mm,
Muhammad Ali gave up his career for a time. He was able to come back, thankfully, which Sinead was not.
mm,
He was able to come back, and he went from being one of the most hated person, in the world to one of the most beloved. And that's because people eventually came around to the fact that he was right.
right. And I don't think sadly Sinead ever got that. You were right, we were wrong. Before she passed.
Not in life. Yeah, not in life. In death, yeah, there were a lot of people who kind of came around, and she was, look, the Catholic Church was hiding rapists. You know, that's the
Mm,
fact. They were hiding rapist priests. They were moving them from parish to parish instead of dealing with them either legally or by excommunicating them.
right.
They didn't, and she was right. And she also experienced some terrible stuff from nuns when she was a child as well. Ireland was a very different country when she made that statement. Ireland is no longer church-based. It is very free. It's more free, I think, probably right now than the United States is. And I've been there, and I didn't want to come back, to be honest. It's a shame that I think the mental issues that she probably would have had to some degree anyway were exacerbated
Mm,
by the treatment she received. Because no
right.
one ever asked why. The biggest thing to me, Jarrell, is when she tore that photo up of the Pope, no one ever asked why she did it. And
Mm.
that's a failure of journalism.
Right, right. Because, to set it up, this happened at her height when Nothing Compares to You was a crossover smash, and she was on top of the world. She performed on SNL. She performed War by Bob Marley,
Yeah,
and she had a
Marley,
picture
that's
of the
right.
Pope, and she ripped it up and said, "Fight the enemy." And of course, it was a hush in the booth and in the audience because one thing you don't do, at least here in America, you don't do that to any
Yeah,
religious figure because of course the association of
right.
religion in this country. And like how you mentioned, they don't ask the why. The only thing they focus on is her ripping up a picture of the Pope and oh, she is doing this to religion, and the witch hunt was on after that.
Yep. Oh yeah, and I watched it live, and I wasn't Catholic or anything, so it didn't affect me in that way. I was just astonished that somebody would go that far,
Right.
that to do it. I mean, that was the thing that got me. I remember sitting in my chair and going, "Well, what the hell are they going to do next?" And then the maelstrom came for her, and she went to perform at I think it was the Bob Dylan 50th birthday concert,
Mm,
and she was going to do a Bob Dylan song, and she was getting booed off the stage. And Chris Christopherson, who had just preceded her and introduced her, he walked over to her, put his arm around her, and said, "Don't let the bastards get you down." And then she did one of the most rock and roll things ever. She sang War again. She sang
mm,
Bob Marley's War again. She refused to leave the stage. And after she sang it, she walked over and she fell into Chris Christopherson's arms because it took everything she had.
right.
Yeah, she's as bold as it gets.
And speaking of Ireland, is U2 in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Look, that's my favorite band ever, to be perfectly honest. Favorite rock band ever, anyway. I've seen them 17, 18 times. Saw them at the Sphere. Yeah, they were first year eligibles, and they got in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And surprising, I correct me if I'm wrong, but did Bono ever put out a solo record or he never did a solo record?
Never. He has made what you would call solo contributions to soundtracks and tribute albums, but he's never gone out on his own. And he was asked why, and like fully out on his own, I should say. He was asked why, and he said because everything he said Solo albums are for people who don't get to do what they want to do in their band. He said, I get to do what I want to do in my band.
Hmm.
So I don't
I
solo
never
album.
looked at it from that output where a solo album is for a artist in a group to showcase what they want to do outside the group. Because when you're in a group, you make certain concessions
Yep.
for the sake of the group. As in the case of Bobby Brown being a New Edition, with him having the bad boy reputation, New Edition having the squeaky clean image, that he was wanting to shed that quicker than what New Edition did, which they didn't get into until the Heartbreak album once Johnny
Yep.
Gill came into the
Yep.
group. But once Bobby went with King of Stage and of course Don't Be Cruel, he really got to really showcase what he wanted to do, but because of the way New Edition is structured and formatted, that he couldn't really be allowed to do.
Yeah, it's a mixture of well, they were very tight. New Edition was very tightly controlled by their management, so I wouldn't say it was a democracy. But for a lot of artists who are in a band, dealing with a democracy can be difficult. I remember a great quote by Lionel Richie when he was in the Commodores, who aren't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and should be, by the way. Lionel said, because like when they first came out, they were kind of more of a funk band, Brick House and all of that, right?
Mm,
And I mean, there's Lionel played horns sometimes, and sometimes he played keyboards, and sometimes he sang. He was a kind of a do-it-all musician, right?
right.
And he said then he started writing his ballads like Easy and the greatest divorce song ever. Help me, help me.
Hello,
Oh gosh. No, no, not Hello.
Three Times a
What was with the
Lady,
Commodore?
Commodores,
No. Oh good Lord. Uh
do
Sail
do
on,
do,
sail on, sail on,
still
sail
on.
on. That's greatest divorce songs ever. And when his ballads started to become bigger hits, he was I hope he was on VH1 or something back in the day, but he said as because he started making more money because he wrote that. And so the writing residuals would go to him, right? And he said, everything is fine in a band as long as everybody's making the same money. Once somebody in the band starts making more money and you start having the nicer car, the nicer house, people start to feel funny about you. They start to feel differently about you, which is why the sort of conglomerate of both U2 and REM, I think, has avoided those sort of pains is that everybody got paid the same.
Mm,
So if Bono and The Edge wrote entirely, the song and the lyrics, and the bass player and the drummer just came in and played on it, they got everybody got 25%.
mm,
Everybody. Because the argument that Bono said, he goes, we're better with each other than we are without each other.
right.
So let's share it evenly. And of course, they made so much money it didn't matter.
Mm,
So
and you mentioned REM. I believe they cut their teeth in the circuit around Athens, Georgia, and also B-52s cut
yep.
their teeth out and around Athens, Georgia. If you know Athens, University of Georgia, college scene, and that's where a lot of bands cut their teeth in the world of college radio and before superstardom, and then they end up exploding, becoming worldwide stars. And we're gonna pivot to movies real quick. There's a documentary that'll be coming out this month, I believe, about Paul Rubens, and they did it before he passed away,
Mhm.
and about how it was kind of hard for him once Pee Wee Herman took off, that
Yep.
he couldn't really separate Pee Wee from Paul. Because me being a
Yep.
kid, seeing Pee Wee's Playhouse, as a kid on CBS on Saturday mornings, I'm like, oh, this is a nice little kiddie show. But looking at it now, I'm like, oh, this show would kind of be more suited for maybe Adult Swim,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
more so than CBS. But it did give us Espicata, I can't recall her name. She's on Law and Order, and of course gave us
Sorry,
Lawrence
Fishburne.
Fishburne,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Cowboy Curtis.
Cowboy Curtis. Yeah, and what's funny, that the first time I'm a little older than you, the first time I ever saw Paul Rubens in a movie was a Cheech and Chong film. Yeah, he works like it's in a diner, and I can't remember he was working in the diner or he just happened to be one of the patrons. And he has a pretty extended scene, and he is so weird. He
Mm-hmm.
is so weird. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
made Cheech and Chong look so normal
Mm-hmm.
at the time. And it's true, it's sort of like Andrew Dice Clay. Andrew Dice Clay, his the character of Dice
Mm-hmm.
was just a character. It wasn't his whole show.
Mm-hmm.
He started out as a comedian who told other jokes or break into a character like Richard Pryor did with Mudbone, and then
Mm-hmm.
he'd come back, and tell more jokes, within his time. But and Larry the Cable Guy is the same way. Larry the Cable Guy was an observational comic who had created this character who become part of his act. In both cases with Larry the Cable Guy and Andrew Dice Clay, the part of the act that people responded to the most was this character they created. So they just became the character, but then they were suffocated by it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the same thing that happened to Paul is I think he had a lot more to offer than just Pee Wee. And look, people love Pee Wee Herman. It's so he shouldn't. I hope wherever he is, he's not feeling bad about himself at all. But I do think he was constricted because of that.
Hmm. And you mentioned with Andrew Dice Clay. Thank you, EMF and Unbelievable, for sampling the
Ooh.
and Unbelievable, but it's kind of a double-edged sword where you have a character so big that you're so popular, but you want to showcase other depth that you have, and it's hard to do that because Sean Weiss, who played Goldberg in the Mighty Ducks movies,
Mhm.
mentioned that he had auditioned for Pee Wee's Playhouse as a kid, and it was Paul Rubens in the audition room, but he wasn't in Pee Wee garb. So he was like 5 or 6 at the audition, Sean Weiss was. And he was confused. So Paul said he'll be right back, left, came back dressed as Pee Wee so that Sean could do the scene.
Wow. Wow. That's crazy. Yeah, because depending on how they shoot, people don't always know this, but sometimes a scene between one character and another, uh, this actor may not even be there.
Mm-hmm.
There might just be a stand-in sitting there for the other actor to bounce off of because there's no close-ups, there's no cutaways to the other actor, so the other actor decides not to show up.
Right.
Now, your more generous actors like Al Pacino, Jack Nicholson, and so forth, they will make sure that they're sitting there so that it makes it easier for the actor to play against the person that they're actually acting with throughout the movie.
Right.
So, if for a kid, if you're not if you're expecting Pee Wee and you get Paul, it's got to be like, how do I do this? I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then switching over to music, I had read that there was supposed to have been a collaboration between Michael Jackson and Freddie Mercury, but what ended up happening was, I guess, in the recording studio, Michael brought one of his pets. It wasn't Bubbles, but Freddie called his people and say, I need to get out this studio. Michael brought his pet llama to the session.
Freddie loved cats. Maybe Michael should have brought a cat.
Yeah, I mean, Michael had everything else. He had tigers, he had Bubbles
Snakes.
the chimp, he
Yeah.
had llamas. He pretty much had Six Flags and a zoo when he
Yeah.
had Neverland. Now I'm looking forward to seeing Michael when it comes out because supposedly it came out this year, but I believe I heard it was getting pushed back to 26. But I'm thinking when it does come out, it's probably going to be one of the most anticipated and also most scrutinized biopics
Oh yeah.
because of the love that people have for Michael Jackson. But I think it's in good hands because you have Antoine Fuqua as the
Yeah.
director, you got Coleman Domingo, Nia Long, and you have Jafar Jackson, who is Michael's nephew, son of Jermaine Jackson, portraying his uncle.
And the whole question comes down to how do they handle the allegations? That's the whole movie right there. If you skip them entirely and just pretend they never happened, which biopics sometimes do, then I think you've ended up in a place where your credibility is shot. When Coleman Domingo signs onto something, though, that gives you a little bit of confidence. Um, and it's a hard thing because he was acquitted twice, right?
Mm,
Our justice system gave him a shot. He took a shot at him twice, and he was acquitted both times. But if you watch the Michael Jackson documentary where the two now adult accusers came forward, um, it was hard not to find them credible.
mm,
Uh, they had matching stories, not like perfectly matching stories, but very particular things about what went on when they were alone with Michael that unless they were collaborating, and there's been no proof or evidence of that, it's very curious, and I just wonder if how far they'll go. That's a tough one. It's a really because they want to make money on this movie.
yeah, it's a delicate dance, but I believe if you're gonna tell the whole thing, tell it all. Don't just
That's the way I
brush
am.
or erase something, pretend
Yep.
like it didn't exist.
Yep, that's the way I am. That's why I was so hurt when the Prince stock wasn't coming forward because um, you know, we want very much to have sacred cows, but I look at it this way, Muhammad Ali race baited George Foreman and Joe Frazier. He cheated on practically all of his wives. Miles Davis beat the hell out of women, but has one of the greatest jazz catalogs ever. Pablo Picasso, aside from being very, very handsy and rough with women, also accepted an award from Stalin. You know, People who are not always good people can produce really extraordinary art.
Mm,
And to want our artists to be perfect human beings. Look, if it came out and it was proven that Michael Jackson molested children, I would still listen to Beat It, or not Beat It, but I don't care for that one that much. But I would still listen to Off the Wall.
mm,
Great album. I mean,
right,
I'm not. It. You if you it because what happens is if you go through your whole life expecting anyone you put on a pedestal to be able to stay on it, if you learn enough about them, you will find out some shit that you wish you didn't
right.
know.
Yeah, so it's like two truths can coexist and be in
Yes.
the same room, just like how some people can still listen to R. Kelly, some can't.
Yep.
I'm of the latter. But it's
Yeah.
not wrong of you to still listen to R.
No.
Kelly, even though of what he did. But like I said, two truths can exist in the same room.
Yeah, and I don't judge anybody for listening to R. Kelly or Michael Jackson if they believe the allegations to be true. If you believe that Prince roughed up a couple of women in his life, maybe more than that. If Miles Davis was, I mean, Jesus, Jim Brown as an athlete, I mean, he threw a woman off a balcony. You know, do I see highlights of Jim Brown on ESPN and go, Jesus, what a man a man among boys, OJ Simpson. OJ Simpson, there, if you see OJ Simpson highlights come up on a reel on Facebook, it's hard
Mm,
not to watch him. He was an
right.
extraordinary running back. He
Hmm.
also just happened to be a double murderer, and you can't. That's not. I'm not trying to be dismissive of that because I think he did it. I think he should have went to jail for it, and I think he should have never got out of jail for it. But that doesn't mean, like you said, two truths can exist, and you have to have the ability to hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. One of the things that I hate, like Kanye West, has become, especially for liberals, villain number one, right?
Hmm.
And I will tell you this, the crazier he's gotten, I think the worse his music has gotten. I think his song, a lot of his music doesn't feel finished. And I don't know if that's because of his mental problems or whatever, but his first six albums, I'll defend. I will never stop defending those first six albums. There's six of the greatest albums ever made in hip hop, the most forward thinking, and he created his own sort of mini genre
Hmm.
within hip hop. I can't not love those songs anymore.
Right.
Can't.
And with the Cowboy Carter tour kicking off,
Yeah,
Beyonce is out performing. Everybody's dressing up in their Western wares. But the main talk of the tour has been Blue Ivy paying her dues, dancing backgrounds, and she's gotten better from when she first started, and now where she's a full-fledged star.
yeah,
Now, your take on the whole thing with her being on tour, a lot of people saying, Nepo baby and that she didn't really have to
yeah,
earn it.
yeah.
But I see that she has because, mom's like, look, you're going to come in, you're going to pay your dues because you're going to have access to rooms that most people don't have. So the optics is going to look as everything's going to get handed to you.
Well,
But you're going to work because Beyonce put in that work when she was around Blue Ivy's age or younger, to get to where she is today.
yeah, I'm going to tell you something that may not play well for all the listeners that we might get for our show today. I am so sick of the term Nepo baby. I can't stand it. And I'll tell you why. Um, Being a Nepo baby will get you into rooms, but your talent keeps you there. George Clooney has often been called a Nepo baby because his aunt was Rosemary Clooney, right? Rosemary Clooney let him stay in LA when he first decided to become an actor for a couple of weeks. And then she kicked him out because he was too lazy, right? Rosemary Clooney introduced him to a few people. But here's the thing, Rosemary Clooney was done then. Nobody cared about Rosemary Clooney anymore. That music was passé, and most of the people that she introduced George to were dinosaurs in the industry. Um, George, his first movie was Grizzly Bear 2, and then it took him another 10 years before he got ER. In those 10 years, he worked his ass off being an extra, doing one shots on Facts of Life, doing movies that went straight to video, and all those kinds of things. If you have talent, you'll stick around. If you don't, you won't. And here's the thing, any of us who had kids who thought that they could excel in the same medium that we were in or a similar medium, would we not try to help them achieve that? Of course we would. So it's just a matter of, you know, people getting upset over this Nepo baby thing because they don't have that opportunity.
Right.
Maybe that's an accident of birth, but it doesn't mean the Nepo baby doesn't have talent. That and eventually, if they don't, people will find out. Look, this is going on with LeBron and his son. You know, Bronny showed some progress over the year. He's not a great player. He may never be a great player. He may be a guy who only ends up playing a 4 or 5 years in the NBA and then goes over to play overseas or something. I don't know. But the truth of the matter is, in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to find out if Bronny James belongs in the NBA. That's what we're going
Mm.
to find out. And did he get a leg up from his dad? Sure he did. But if if your dad was a fireman and you wanted to become a fireman too, do you not think, and I know we're talking about very different levels of stratosphere here,
Mm.
but do you not think that your dad wouldn't take you to the firehouse, show you around, maybe have you learn some things and see if your interest prevailed, and then maybe you would become a fireman. It's just we're just talking about different levels of fame. That's all.
Yeah, because like in that case, Malia Obama, she was working on a movie and she went by her middle name and then put the Obama at the end so that way she could distance the last name,
Yeah.
because of the optics behind it. And, it's just where I'm going to show you the door, but it's up to you to leave it open.
Yep. I mean, my favorite version of this type of thing with the name changing is Nicky Coppola. Francis Ford's nephew is Nicolas Cage. And he changed, I think he has a couple of very, very early credits as Nicky Coppola in small, small parts. And he did not want to succeed on his uncle's name.
Right.
And so he went with by his full name of Nicholas in front, and his favorite superhero was Luke Cage. So he became Nicolas Cage.
And there's facts for you, and then also on the movie tip, we just saw the trailer for the movie Him that'll be dropping around in September with Marlon Wayans and Jordan Peele got a hand in that. So, what's your take on this movie coming out and saying now Jordan Peele has pretty much been putting out top shelf stuff since Get Out?
Yeah, I have a level of frustration with Jordan Peele in that, and this is Get Out aside. Get Out, I think, is a complete masterpiece. I thought both Us and Nope were brilliantly set up, but they don't come together at the end. And they have individually extraordinary set pieces. They're well acted. Well, Kiki Palmer I thought was actually pretty awful in Nope, but that's beside the point. But he is a way above ground thinker. But I don't feel that his last two films have finished. They've sort of just kind of sputtered to an end. What's interesting is he's been away for a little while now. So maybe by spending, more, yeah, it's sort of like how they say about your first album. You have your
Mm-hmm.
whole life to write your first album, and you have 2 years to write your second, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, Jordan was doing a movie every 2 years, and now he's taken, I think, at least 3 years off. So, maybe he's going to dig in deep. I root for him. I root for him. He is an original thinker. He is a one of a kind guy. I just want to walk out of the theater going, almost. I don't want to do that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to do that again.
Yeah, and one franchise that really hit pay dirt was the Super Mario Brothers movie. It was because Nintendo waited 30 years to put
Yeah,
out another property movie because the first Super Mario Brothers movie bombed.
it was
Rest in
Bob
peace, Bob
Hoskins and John
Hoskins, John
Leguizamo.
Leguizamo,
Yeah,
Dennis Hopper, rest in peace, played
yeah,
King Koopa.
yeah,
And they got it right when they put out the animated piece,
yep,
and now it got Nintendo thinking, let's do possibly Zelda. Let's do Star
yeah.
Fox. Uh, let's do whatever. Let's do another Nintendo property that you all know and love. Maybe we can even redo the Wizard, minus the Power Glove.
I gotta tell you, when Super Mario Brothers came out and the box office grosses started coming in, I was stunned. I mean, I thought, there's a built-in audience for this and it would do fine. I had no idea it was going to crack like $400 million domestically. I mean, that was just
Right.
extraordinary.
I went to the theaters to go see it. I like the touch when they put the theme from the Super Mario Brothers show at the very beginning, which had rest in peace Captain Lou Albano playing Mario, and there was a
Yeah,
lot of Easter eggs for those of us that grew up playing Mario Brothers on Nintendo that you got right away, or Mario Kart on Super Nintendo. And I was like, if you don't have nobody get hit by a shell on Rainbow Road, this ain't legit. And that they did, and it's legit. And while we're speaking of Nintendo, Paul Rudd just recreated his 1991 Super NES commercial for the Nintendo Switch 2. And that should be coming out this summer, but of course, it's gonna be an arm and a leg due to tariffs. But it's just great to see how Nintendo really struck gold with the Mario Brothers franchise, and how I'm thinking other companies are maybe looking and saying, okay, what dormant video game franchise can we revive? I'm looking at you, Capcom. Yes, we want to do another Street Fighter, not
yeah,
like the bad one in '94
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah, yeah.
John Claude Van Damme. Rest
Yeah,
in peace, Raul Julia. But at least, thankfully, we
yeah,
had Kylie Minogue play Cammy. So I'll give
yeah.
you a thumbs up for that one.
Yeah, I no, yeah, never go against Kylie. And it's funny you mentioned Lou Albano since he was connected to Cyndi Lauper during the wrestling years. It's funny that because we're talking about in some cases bringing back old IP, because the nostalgia factor and the built-in audience is there. Years ago, this is a true story. My wife's uncle, he owned a he owned a toy company, and they would sometimes sign deals with um, uh, you know, movies to like Independence Day was one that they signed a deal with to make the action figures
Mm.
from the film. And so there, Godzilla had lost pretty much all like when Godzilla 1984 came out. From 1984 to the Matthew Broderick movie, which wasn't very good, but that's beside the point. There was Godzilla had no real presence in the United States. It was still very much a Tokyo-based entity at that time. It had lost all of its cachet around the world. And so my wife's uncle had met with a Japanese man, and they had closed a toy deal for some other toy. And he was just being inquisitive, and he said, "What do you think is the next big thing?" And the Japanese toy maker said, "Old equity." And he goes, "Well, what do you mean by old equity?" "Find something old that hasn't been popular for a long time. You can buy it for cheap, and then you own it, and it will come back." And he said, "Okay, interesting." Well, when he was a little kid, he and his brother, my father-in-law, were huge fans of Godzilla. So my uncle-in-law went around the country looking for any Godzilla toys he could find. The only thing he found was a little keychain that was sold in like some convenience store. And when you squeezed it, it was supposed to roar, but it made like a squeaking sound. And he was like, "This is terrible, you know?" So he bought it. And so then Toyo Studios in Tokyo owns the rights to Godzilla. And so he talked to their people, they talked to him. And before he went out there, he asked his toy makers to create me a bust of Godzilla, a prototype, right? And so he walks into the room, and he's got a bag in his hand, and he sits the bag down by his feet. And then they start talking, and there's the translators and all that. He pulls out the little keychain with the squeaker, and he squeaks it, and he tosses it on the table, and he says, "Guys, this is what Godzilla is in America." And he said, "But hold on a moment." And he reached down into his bag, and he pulled out the prototype, and he put it on the counter, and he said, "But this is what Godzilla could be in America." And they sold him the rights for however many years to Godzilla outside of Tokyo. And he also ended up buying Mothra and some of the subsidiary characters so they could make
Mm.
toys out of those too. And he retired about 2 years later when the Matthew Broderick movie came out.
Smart.
So yeah, so we like to joke he has Godzilla money.
Smart.
It's plural.
Smart. Also, kind of brings to mind, Sega found pay dirt with the Sonic franchise and with it
Yeah.
making buku bucks. And of course, me being a 90s child and having a Sega Genesis,
Yep.
I was front row and center to see Sonic and just looking to see what else they can introduce from the Sonic universe. And also, Jim Carrey was in rare form in those Sonic movies, and it kind of reminded us why we fell in love with Jim Carrey, whether it be in Living Color, Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, Liar Liar, insert whatever movie here about Jim
Oh,
Carrey.
Truman Show. Yeah. What's funny about Jim Carrey is the Sonic movies have probably been his high points for the last 10 to 15 years. He hasn't really been able to get anything else off the ground that has restored his success level
Mm,
other than those. So yeah, I mean and he's an interesting comedian. I find him I like him better when he tones down and plays like a regular character like he does in Truman Show.
mm,
Because and I although I thought he was hilarious on In Living Color, I always just felt like his comedy reminded me of a wolf caught in a trap trying to chew its leg off, only he
mm.
was trying to chew his leg off to make you laugh.
Right.
And it felt like too much to me.
Right.
So small doses, I thought he was very funny, but his straight comedies like Mask, I always struggle with those. But like, what's the one? Oh, with Kate Winslet, it's got the strange title. Uh,
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Eternal Sunshine. Yeah. I mean, I really liked that one too. And I enjoy Liar Liar actually as well. I think that's a funny one, and I think he's got a little more even hand there. But he's an extraordinary talent. And I watched the Robin Williams documentary. I think it's on Max or HBO, Come Into My Mind or something like that. I think it's called something like that.
Mm,
And there's so many scenes of his rapid fire ability to talk and think and come up with things that make sense and string along and I think Jim Carrey had a certain amount of that, has a certain amount of that too, where his brain just works faster than everybody else's.
hmm.
And if you can get on his wavelength, it's really, really funny. I was
Right.
never able to get on his wavelength the way I could Robin Williams, though.
Yeah, because I had read, I guess when Robin Williams was filming Mrs. Doubtfire, he did so much improv that he had different cuts where it was like a PG cut, PG
Yeah.
13 cut, a R cut, and an
Yeah.
NC 17 cut because of
Yeah.
so much improvisation on set.
Yeah, the nice thing in the documentary, they show a lot of the stuff that wasn't used in Doubtfire and some other movies as well. And you're like, oh, they couldn't have used that and kept their rating. They couldn't have held that rating. No way.
No, imagine if he would have did like a R-rated cut of the genie outtakes from Aladdin.
Oh man, yeah, and there's some outtakes from Aladdin too. Although he didn't, I don't think he pressed as hard there. He knew he was in the Disney world, but there's still some really really funny stuff from there. And it's a shame, him coming down with Parkinson's and
Mhm.
being such a sensitive soul and being so prone to depression. He just got a bad bag of a bad bag of marbles upstairs.
Yeah, yeah, definitely agreed. And it kind of makes me think, flown around, is there probably a R-rating outtake gags of Eddie Murphy as Donkey on Shrek? I'm just
Oh God,
waiting for the
oh
R-rated
yeah.
Donkey outtakes from Shrek to come out.
I wonder, 'cause that's Pixar, right? I wonder if
No, that's DreamWorks.
It's DreamWorks, that's right. DreamWorks might let those come out. Pixar, I don't know if they would.
Yeah,
Disney,
yeah.
I don't,
Disney's pretty squeaky clean because if you're working
yeah,
for the mouse, you
yeah.
gotta be squeaky clean. And I want to get you out of here on this. What's your take on? I heard that they're going to be doing a reboot of Gremlins, and also there's possibly talks of a not a reboot, but something along the lines of where they're going to redo Goonies. Especially now, since Kehu Kwan, Oscar Award winning
Yeah,
Kehu
yeah,
Kwan, and of course Sean Astin and Josh Brolin, everybody's big, but once again, we kind of go back to existing IP, and we're
right.
gonna make it over. But you're also in the same time when you're making the old IP popular for a new generation, you're also reintroducing the originals to the current generation, the kids who weren't alive to see these original properties.
Yeah, you think about it, the longer we're around, the more stuff that's going to fall through the cracks, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think there's too much remaking going on in Hollywood. I do think that, but I'm also not a person who defies the idea of the remake. If there were no remakes, then no one would have ever seen a William Shakespeare play because they'd all be dead because Shakespeare's plays were in what, the 15th, 16th century.
Mhm.
And so if you weren't allowed to remake Shakespeare, whether it be on stage or screen, uh, you'd only have the written words, right?
Mhm.
And some remakes actually do work. It's I mean, you know what one I really liked, and I wish more people liked it, but was the Fright Night remake a few years ago with Colin Farrell as the vampire next door.
Mhm.
They changed it up. They made it a little more blue collar and so forth. And I love the original. But I think what you have to try to do with those is you have to not lose the core of what made the original. entertaining and useful, but you also kind of have to expand the world to the one that we live in,
Mm,
right? And to do that is both an art and a skill.
mm,
And I think remakes are a lot harder to do well than people think. If
right.
you look at another good example is The Manchurian Candidate. You know, the Frank Sinatra version from years ago is considered a classic. When Denzel's version came out, gosh, was that the late 90s? It got okay reviews because it had Jonathan Demme from Silence of the Lambs behind the camera, and I think there was some respect that was kind of built into the expectations. But the funny thing is people look at that movie now because they did do some updating of it. They didn't make it, purely like the original. Uh, people who rewatch that have a better opinion of it now. It's just but sometimes what you may bring to it is problematic, and that's more about you and me. But for people who are 15, 20 years younger than us, that shit may not matter at all.
No. Yeah, which is probably why I think updated version of Revenge of the Nerds probably could not fly today.
Probably not. But if they do bring back the Goonies, it would be kind of cool if Sean Astin and Josh Brolin had cameos as dads or something in it, you know. I mean, I would that would be kind of pleasing.
Yeah, and you got to have Sean Astin in the Notre Dame jacket to connect it to
Yeah,
Rudy.
for Rudy, that's right. And if they can get Cindy to sing a new theme song, I'd go along with that too.
Right, and then maybe have an Easter egg in the Goonies reboot to pay homage to Encino Man because Kehu Kwan was in Encino Man, and Sean Astin was in Encino Man as well,
That's right. I'd forgotten about
with
that.
another
Shoot,
future Oscar Award winner, Brendan Fraser.
yeah, well, I'm upset about that one. Girl should have won, but nonetheless, yeah. The funny thing about Key Kwan is, if you look at him close, he looks older, but at glances, he does in his 30s. Like he could
He can
almost
still play
play
like a
with
teen role.
playing a much character.
Hmm. All right,
Yeah,
so
I mean, I think you could almost do it, especially. Yeah, especially with, digital animation now. Yeah, I mean, digital makeup. So,
hmm hmm all right, so before we conclude, David,
oh, you blanked for a second.
oh yeah, any shout outs you want to give and plug your socials?
Yeah, so you can find my writing at thecontending.com. You can find me on Instagram at Real Reframe. And shout outs. Gosh, who should I shout out? My wife is very, very close to finishing her master's in Shakespeare, and I'm really excited about that for her. I'm getting really, really used to being the second smartest person in the house. There you go.
All right, so we got all that. You can catch this interview wherever you stream podcasts and on the official YouTube channel at youtube.com/beyond the album cover. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause for my friend David E. Phillips from the Contending. David, thank you for coming on. You're more than welcome to come back on anytime, man.
Thank you, Jarrell.
And remember, people, wear your hats and a gangster's life ain't fun. And cover your stuff. NWH tells you that.